Hello and welcome back to our reading. I hope you guys enjoyed the myths that we read yesterday. Today we're going to step into something a little differently. We're going to be reading chapter 7 called Severing Ties. And this is going to be about how the arrival of the settlers and the U.S. government affected Native Americans living west of the Mississippi River. So do not forget, when you are done, head over to Google Classroom, do the assignment that goes with chapter 7, and this is your last assignment for the week because I hear tomorrow is a STEM day, and then Friday starts your spring break, so don't forget to hand it in. And remember, this reader is also online if you'd like to follow along. Native Americans were well adapted to the cycles and patterns of nature. Whether they lived in a small fishing village or a large sprawling farming society, they learned to survive in harmony with their surroundings. They used wood from trees, but they did not cut down all the trees. They used every part of the buffalo, but they did not kill all the buffalo. They made jewelry using the mountains and rivers to get all these materials. They gathered nuts and berries, but not too many, and they always left enough new seed to sprout for future generations. The basic rules and patterns of nature never really changed. The cycles remained the same, and yet change is everything. Change comes with every season, just as it comes in various stages of our lives. These are the changes we understood and know to expect. But sometimes there are other types of changes nobody can predict exactly what the future will bring. Native Americans understood this fact long before they encountered Europeans. Through their myths and spiritual ceremonies, Native Americans gave thanks and praise to nature's helping spirits, the plants, animals, waters, and sunshine. They also asked the spirits for safety and mercy. They asked to be spared from famine, drought, and war. Most years, the people were happy, well-fed, and at peace with their neighbors, but they knew there would also be lean years when the buffalo herds were too thin or little rain fell on the corn and the bean crops. They knew there would be wars and conflicts with other tribes as well. Some tribes controlled better land with more food and resources than other tribes. Some tribes grew to be large and dominant, while others simply survived from season to season. Some tribes faced more trials and tribulations than others. Sometimes one tribe would force another tribe off its land, so for example, as eastern woodland tribes might have to adapt to life on the plains, or a plateau tribe might have to learn to survive in the desert. Sometimes the victors of war would take the losers captive or adopt them into their tribe. Other times, mighty tribes fell and weaker ones rose up. And so everything changed, and yet in many ways everything stayed the same. In spite of all of life's challenges, Native Americans upheld their way of life for thousands of years. Wherever they were, they strived to live in harmony with their surroundings. They lived according to the same patterns and cycles as everything else in nature. When the acorns ripened and fell, when it was time to gather and eat acorns. When the buffalo moved, it was time to move the village. And when the spring rains fell, it was time to plant new seeds. Year after year and generation after generation, according to these cycles, Native American tribes created their own history. Europeans who migrated to the Americas did not share the same traditions and beliefs as Native Americans. Aside from their culture, religion, and technology, Europeans had different beliefs regarding land ownership and individual rights and liberties. To understand just how very different they were, it is important to reflect on what life was like in Europe. In the late 1400s, Europe was just emerging from the feudal system of the Middle Ages. Most people were still tied to the farming land, the bulk of which was owned by rich, influential members of the nobility. There was no free land to explore and settle on. There was very little social mobility. For 300 years after Columbus's first journey, the exploration and colonization of the New World brought incredible new wealth to European nations. However, a large part of that wealth went straight to the same royals and aristocrats who already owned all the land and resources in the Old World. Then came the founding of the United States in 1776. This new nation put in place... Sorry, my phone went off. This new nation put in place systems of laws designed to protect the right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, the New World offered new hope and opportunity for even the most lowly members of European society. The New World offered land ready to be farmed to all, including those who would never have such an opportunity in their own countries. However, it was quite that simple. By the late 1700s, land in the East had been claimed, and there was stiff competition for jobs. Therefore, many new immigrants looked beyond the East to the frontier, the untamed wilderness, for opportunity. The nation doubles in size. In 1803, President Jefferson completed the Louisiana Purchase, which doubled the new nation's territory. This huge area of land was mostly unmapped and unknown wilderness to Europeans settling in the United States. In 1804, Lewis and Clark began their famous journey to explore the land west of the Mississippi River. Their explorations held spark interest in this land. By 1850, people realized that all the land, the American West as it came to be known, was not only vast but also full of resources. It did not take long for this news to travel to Europe. For those escaping the troubles of the Old World, the American West seemed like a haven. There, anyone could live free and prosper if they were willing to work. Also, as it turned out, they needed to be willing to fight or manage the Native Americans who had been living there for thousands of years. Throughout the second half of the 1800s, immigrants, largely from Europe, flowed into the United States. Many became pioneers, risking everything for a chance to settle and build new lives. Generally, pioneers were not there to live in harmony with nature or abide by Native American customs and laws. They were there to tame the land and gain wealth from it. Some of the resources were obvious: endless forests, fine soil and ranch land, massive buffalo herds, and sometimes even gold nuggets just sitting there on the ground waiting to be picked up. But some of the most valuable resources were buried underground, such as coal, iron, oil, copper, and other minerals. These resources did not shine like gold or silver, but over time they proved to be even more valuable. They provided the raw materials for America's growing cities and industries. For the people of the United States, the American West was a great treasure trove of land and resources. However, Native Americans had already made this land their home. To the pioneers in the U.S. government who wanted to settle on the land, the presence of Native Americans was a problem. The U.S. government decided that one way to control and confront Native Americans was to encourage immigrants and other people in crowded eastern cities to move west. This gave rise to one of the most important legislations of the U.S. history, the Homestead Act of 1862. With the passage of the Homestead Act, vast tracts of land throughout the West were made available to new settlers. Anyone aged 21 or older could apply for a homestead of usually 160 acres. In exchange for the land, homesteaders had to live on it for at least 5 years and improve it by creating a profitable farm or ranch. The Homestead Act triggered a land rush throughout the America West, as thousands of new settlers staked their claims and worked to build new lives. Of course, many of these homesteads were on Native American homelands. Many tribes felt that they had no choice but to defend their way of life. Problems usually started with small disagreements, but they soon spiraled out of control. The brutal Sand Creek Massacre of 1864 is an example of this. In that case, U.S. soldiers in the Colorado Territory attacked a peaceful village and killed over 100 Cheyenne, mostly women and children and elderly men. The tribe's warriors were out hunting at the time, but when they returned and saw what the soldiers had done, they swore revenge. The surviving Cheyenne and other tribes attacked settlers throughout the area, kidnapping and killing entire families. Thus began a bloody cycle of revenge. Wars between Native Americans and settlers from the United States broke out in every region of the West, from the Great Plains to California. These wars were bloody and costly. In an effort to end the fighting and solve the Indian problem once and for all, the U.S. government greatly expanded the reservation system. This meant forcing Native Americans onto areas of land set aside for them. This had begun years earlier with the Indian Appropriations Act of 1851. Then Congress set aside money to create reservations throughout what is now Oklahoma, where the Cherokee were forced to move during the Trail of Tears. Most tribes refused to move into reservations at first, so the U.S. Army tried to force them. The fighting only increased and the wars became bloodier. After years of war, some tribes managed to make peace treaties with the U.S. government. Instead of moving to distant reservations, individual tribes were allowed to carve out little land reservations in their ancestral homes. This was the case with some of the stronger, larger tribes. They still lost much of their freedom and land, but each tribe was treated as an independent nation within the United States. Unfortunately, none of these peace treaties lasted long. Settlers continued to encroach on Native American land anyway. Furthermore, the reservation lands were usually unsuited to supporting the tribes. Due to little rain and poor soil, Native Americans often left the reservations to hunt and gather food. The main problem, as far as the settlers and U.S. government were concerned, was that some tribes still had powerful popular leaders. Even on reservations, Native Americans maintained power and influence because they continued to work together as tribes. The U.S. government felt that the tension and fighting would continue as long as Native American tribes were treated as independent nations within a nation. With the Indian Appropriations Act of 1871, the United States officially stopped treating each tribe as a separate nation. After 1871, by law, all individual Native Americans were considered wards of the federal government. The U.S. government no longer wished to deal with tribes as a whole. Instead, they wanted to deal with individuals in the hopes that the tribal structure would finally collapse once and for all. Native Americans were no longer independent, but they were not U.S. citizens either. In the eyes of the law, they became dependents with few freedoms and rights to do anything unless the government agreed. Of course, one act of Congress did not change a structure that had been in place for thousands of years. While some Native Americans decided the only way to survive was to lay down their guns and learn to live according to the laws of the United States, many others refused to give up. To them, life on the reservation was no life at all, and they would rather die fighting than watching their families starve. But eventually, the U.S. government did succeed in breaking the tribes. Although the Appropriations Acts of 1871 did not bring an end to the wars, it did mark the beginning of a particularly tragic chapter in the story of Native American resistance: broken promises. Years later, a great Lakota chief named Red Cloud said this: "They made us many promises, more than I can remember, but they never kept one. They promised to take our land, and they took it." This quote neatly summarized what happened to Native Americans when the United States expanded across the West. Tribes had a connection to the land that non-Native Americans could not understand. Without land, it was extremely difficult for tribes to maintain their culture and identity. So that is where we are going to stop today. Do not forget to go onto Google Classroom and find the assignment that goes with Chapter 7 and hand it in as soon as you are done. It is your last chapter of the week. Feedback will be provided, and I hope you guys have a great spring break, and I will be back with you when spring break is over, and I can't wait to continue our story and finish reading with you. Have a great night.